Good afternoon from Jakarta. Welcome to the fourth FPCI Group's virtual public forum. Today's forum is titled Climate Policy Post-COP26, What's Next? This public forum is brought to you by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia in collaboration with National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS. Ladies and gentlemen, we are providing translation or interpretation feature from English to Japanese. So for participants who want to listen to Japanese audio throughout the session, you can click interpretation button from on the bottom right screen, select Japanese, and then mute the original audio. Without further ado, to open our session today, I would like to invite Dr. Dino Jalal, the founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Dino, you may have the floor.
Sorry, okay, good. Hello, everybody. I hope you were inviting me to speak because I just lost my audio for a little bit. But I want to welcome all the speakers who are speaking today. Dr. Ishii, who is very famous as a strong voice from Japan on climate issues. Imura-san, my partner in GRIPS, thank you. Jun Arima and Sharon Shea, thank you very much for joining the discussion today. And I must say that after COP26 in Glasgow, I'm feeling a lot better. We were a bit frustrated in Indonesia because we thought that the attention to COVID, which was justifiable, but was not being balanced by a equally strong attention or commitment towards a climate challenge. And I'm glad that COP26 in Glasgow reached, not perfect, but a good movement forward. And in my view, the two challenges that come after Glasgow is one, execution. Right, that's always going to be a big challenge because not every country has the same capacity. And secondly, acceleration, right? Because we're seeing many anecdotal evidence that climate change is actually coming a lot sooner. The worst is coming a lot faster than we had anticipated. So, I welcome this discussion on how countries can move forward. Indonesia is chairman of G20 this year. There's a strong push for more. I should let you know that yesterday we met with Minister Luhut, coordinating minister for maritime and investment, and he said that the government is serious about phasing out coal, but just phasing out 5 gigawatt of coal would cost about 25 billion.
It seems like Dr. Dino is having a technical issue. So, yeah, we will continue first to our agenda. Okay, so next we will listen to a remark from Ambassador Yutaka Imura, who is the former ambassador of Japan to Indonesia and also the senior fellow and visiting professor at National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS. So let me invite Ambassador Yutaka Imura. Ambassador Imura, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Ambassador Dino Jalal, Excellencies, distinguished guests, my old friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in the fourth FPCI GRIPS public forum today. Since the middle of last year, GRIPS and FPCI have been collaborating on a variety of intellectual exchange activities, including online lectures and webinars. In last September, GRIPS President Akihiko Tanaka gave a lecture on the theme of building Indo-Pacific cooperation in Asia in the 21st century at the second Southeast Asia Lecture Hall organized by FPCI. The event was attended by 2,500 students, including GRIPS students. FPCI has a wide network with universities in regional cities as well as capital cities. Capital cities. I'm sorry. Yeah, in Southeast Asian countries, and I was very much impressed by the various questions raised by the young students with deep insight. GRIPS has been cooperating with FPCI as a university partner in the management of large symposiums, such as Global Town Hall held by FPCI in November 20, and I was happy to hear that 12,000 people from all over the world attended the symposium this year. GRIPS will also co-host the FPCI GRIPS Public Forum with FPCI 5 times from last October to this coming February. The 3 previous FPCI GRIPS Public Forum were held under the themes of opportunities and challenges for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, the Asian century, and Get to Know Generation Y and Z, where active discussions were held on Asian politics, security, economy, and society. In the 4th FPCI GRIPS Forum, under the theme of climate policy post-COP26, what's next? We will have discussions among panelists from universities and research institutes in Indonesia, Singapore, Japan, and some other countries. Japan has been encouraging countries around the world to take proactive climate change measures at multilateral meetings such as COP26. Prime Minister Kishida participated in the World Leaders Summit of the COP26 on last November. He called all parties to take ambitious climate change countermeasures, recognizing the period until 2030 as a critical decade. He also shared Japan's commitment in the field of climate change, such as its updated nationally determined contribution, which is abbreviation is NDC, toward 2030. $10 billion dollars additional assistance to the developing countries in the coming 5 years, and doubling adaptation finance, promoting green innovation, and participating in the global methane pledge. Japan is also actively supporting efforts to address climate change and energy transition in Asia, particularly in ASEAN. At the ASEAN-Japan Summit held in October last year, prior to the COP26 meeting, Prime Minister Kishida announced the ASEAN-Japan Climate Change Action Agenda 2.0 in order to lead the international community to achieve carbon neutrality, and expressed its commitment to promote cooperation with ASEAN countries in the area of transparency, mitigation, and adaptation. In Asia, including ASEAN, in addition to addressing climate change issues, several difficult issues are ways to be solved at the same time, such as securing stable and affordable energy and realizing sustainable economic growth. Prime Minister Kishida stated that Japan would provide comprehensive support to ASEAN countries through the formulation of roadmap for energy transition, technical cooperation, and human resource development, including those under Asia Energy Transition Initiative. In today's public forum, I strongly hope that the panelists will engage in lively discussions on how ASEAN and Japan, which share various common challenges, such as addressing climate change, securing stable energy supply, and realizing sustainable growth, should promote financial and technological cooperation for green growth and energy transition. I'd like to conclude my opening remarks by wishing that many of the audience members who participated in this public forum will continue to participate in the various intellectual exchange programs jointly organized by FPCI and GRIPS in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Imura, for your remark. Before we continue, I think Dr. Dino has joined us back again, so I'd like to invite back Dr. Dino to have the floor. Dr. Dino, are you there?
Yeah, actually, I was just finished with my remarks, and I'm just looking forward to hearing the discussions. I don't want to get in the way of that, but thank you, Imura-san, for your friendship and cooperation, and looking forward for more cooperation between us.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dino. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to proceed to the discussion on climate policy post-COP26, what's next? It is a very interesting topic, and we have been joined by more than 100 participants in the Zoom meeting and also YouTube channel, who I'm sure are already waiting for it. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our moderator for today, Ms. Dayu Nirma Amurwanti, the faculty member of International Relations Department in Bina Nusantara University, and also a climate and forest policy advisor for the Royal Norwegian Embassy. So without further ado, Ms. Dayu, you may take over.
Thank you, and thank you to Ambassador Dino and Ambassador Yutaka Imura. Welcome, everyone, wherever you are, whether from Indonesia. I saw somebody from the Philippines saying hello from Japan. Thank you for joining us in this Friday afternoon. If you're spending your weekend with us, it says a lot about our commitment to addressing climate change. Thank you to Foreign Policy Community Indonesia and also the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, for inviting me to moderate the session. Talking about the 26th Conference of Parties to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change recently held in Glasgow, we saw the public's reactions have been mixed. Even before we began our discussion today, the speakers also have both positive and not so optimistic view about the conference and what happens after next. We saw from the media that there is a lot of geopolitical finger pointing, saying that developed countries have not done enough to help developing nations to accelerate the implementation of their climate ambition. There's also an accusation that this emerging nations such as China, Brazil, India, and Russia, who are not stepping up and doing enough to do their part. But there's also a lot of positive news, as we have heard, that now adaptation is front and center, because we know that we are not only preventing the effects of climate change, we're already dealing with the effects of climate change. There are a pledge of more resources for phasing down of coal, for example, helping countries transition to more renewable energy. There's reduction of methane emission. There's also a pledge to end net deforestation. So with that, I believe that we have excellent speakers, resource persons joining us today. I would like to introduce them one by one. The first is Dr. Naoko Ishii. Hello, good afternoon. Dr. Naoko Ishii has joined University of Tokyo on August 1st, 2020 as a professor, executive vice president, and inaugurating director for Central of Global Commons, whose mission is to catalyze system change so that human can achieve sustainable development within planetary boundaries. Her belief is that academia can and should play a more active role in mobilizing movements of multi-stakeholders towards a shared goal of nurturing stewardship of global commons. Prior to joining the university, she served as the CEO of Global Environmental Facility from 2012 to 2020. She formed the first midterm strategy for the GEF with strong focus on transformation and key economic systems. She entered the Ministry of Finance, Japan in 1981 and served as Deputy Vice Minister of Finance for 2010-2012. She obtained BA in Economics and PhD in International Development from University of Tokyo. Hello, Dr. Naoko Ishii.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And next we will have Professor Jun Arima. He is the project professor, Graduate School of Public Policy, University of Tokyo. He is also a distinguished senior research fellow, Asia Pacific Institute of Research Senior Policy Fellow, Economic Research Institute of ASEAN and East Asia, or AREA, and lead author of IPCC's 6th Assessment Report. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much indeed for having me here.
Thank you. And if we see his CV, he is probably one of the experts that followed negotiations since even the Kyoto Protocol. So welcome. We're glad to have you here with us. Next, we have Ms. Sharon Sia. She is the Senior Fellow and Coordinator at the ASEAN Study Center and currently Coordinator of Climate Change in Southeast Asia program at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute. Prior to that, she was Associate Director of the Center of International Law, National University of Singapore. She spent 14 years at the National Environmental Agency and Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Singapore, prior to entering the academia, including a diplomatic posting to Bangkok, Thailand from 2003 to 2007. Her main interest is in ASEAN, rule of law, multilateralism, climate change, and environmental issues. She graduated with Master in Public and International Law from the University of Melbourne in 2018. Welcome, Ms. Sharon Sia.
Thank you very much to FPCI and GRIPS for inviting me to this event.
Thank you. And we also have Ibu Kukki Handayani Sujahmun, or popularly known as Ibu Kukki Sujahmun, who is currently the Executive Director of IRID and one of the co-founders. She's been working climate change since 1990s. Perhaps some of our participants were not born yet during those times. Her first area in this issue was the scientific modeling, especially in relation to energy sector. She then continued to work on climate policy analysis, as well as international climate negotiation up to the present. During her time at Pelangi, Indonesia, she was actively involved in Climate Action Network, not only in Indonesia, but also Southeast Asia and international. She was one of the member of the international board, as well as Southeast Asia. She took part in negotiations since 2000 in the meeting Lyon and then the 6th COP in The Hague. And she was also Executive Director of Pelangi, Indonesia, and joined the Office of President's Special Envoy for Climate Change for 2 terms when she was involved in the negotiation during the preparation of Paris Agreement. So other than Professor Jun Arima, we also have someone who took part even in the negotiation and knows the history of this climate change negotiation. So welcome, Ibu Kukki. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. So let's start with the first round of discussions. And I would like to encourage members of our audience, the participants, to take part by posting your questions, your comments in the Q&A box. And we hope that we can read out or also ask your questions to our panelists. Let's begin with Dr. Naoko Ishii. So Naoko-san, let me ask you about your impression on the COP26. Do you think that it has been an inclusive conference where everyone is participating equally? And do you have any examples where multilateral collaboration is at play and has been successful in Glasgow?
Yeah. No, thank you, Dayo. Let me just say one thing about the Asia and the climate. Because I am convinced that the battle of the climate change, it will be either won or lost in Asia. We all know that Asia as a growth center, and then some of us are still very much developing it at the fast pace, and we rely on also that fossil fuel energy. So what we will do for the next decade was so really determine or dictate the future of not only Asia, but also the globe. That's why today's conversation is so critical, so important. I'm so happy that I want to congratulate that FPCI and the GRIPS to take on this very difficult topic. And thank you so much for having us. But we definitely look for the kind of new growth model and how to get out of this fossil fuel, which we know that we cannot rely on forever. But then what we should do next, at the same time, that the one good thing about COP these days is it's not only that the energy, but also we have a focus on the natural capital, which Indonesia and then the Asian countries have plenty of the natural capital. So definitely we are looking for a new growth model for this century. So that is my kind of, my starting point. So that going back to your question about my takeaway from COP26, I also attended a COP from 2010. So it was my 30th COP in my different capacity. And actually the nature of the COP changed quite significantly, maybe as just before the Paris COP. Before that, it's a very difficult and official negotiation, which we really didn't understand about either logic or terminology. But then around the time that the Paris COP, the more and more so-called non-state actors have actually started to participate in that either they are helping to push or actually providing a new solution or kind of, make it a much more inclusive process, because that then what we are dealing with, it's not just something that the official state negotiators can handle. It's really that then it's everybody's business. And so that's how this process needs to be inclusive. And actually it has started to have to have those diverse actors, and the process become very inclusive. I firmly believe the success of the Paris COP is very much of having and supported by non-state actors. And that has actually continued towards the Glasgow. And while I think that we were not necessarily too positive about the official negotiation outcome, there are great part, but not so great part. But then in general, as a whole, I'm quite excited about it, because I see that quite an important announcement, that the commitment and the actions are actually that are being produced out of this non-state actor, and actually together with state actors, more like a multi-stakeholder coalition together. And then just to name a few, that here that we see that the big alliance of the finance, G funds, that then the Glasgow and the Financial Alliance and for climate. Then that I see that an effort to have to provide more standardization of those funds, like an ISSB, International the Sustainability Standard Board, and also that the good multilateral, multi-stakeholder coalition, quite a number of them. And the one thing I just want to mention is this early transition mechanism for Asian power sector, energy sector, which presents a good example of that collaboration with the MDBs, ADB and others, and actually bilateral government, then commercial banks, the philanthropy, and then coming together to really tailor their, the assistance to country by country. I saw that Indonesia and the Philippines actually that already decided to join this mechanism. And this is the new way of the multilateralism. So that I was quite excited to see those, the good example really coming out of those very difficult process. And then going forward, I want to see more like an execution with accountability of those multi-stakeholder coalitions. Back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I believe not only Asia should be the growth center where we produce emissions, but we need to also provide solutions like Dr. Naoko Ishii said, with participation of non-state actors. Let me go to Professor Jun Arima. Dr. Naoko Ishii actually ended with the importance of not only agreeing to key commitments, but also on the implementation. So what do you think of the Glasgow COP26? Have we made significant commitments, or has it been watered down? And what do you think about the point where everyone needs to be accountable, that implementation should also be something that we need to monitor other than the key commitments made in those conferences?
Okay, and thank you very much, Dayu-san, for kind introduction. And I have somehow a mixed feeling about the outcome of COP26. The assessment of the COP26 will depend on to whom you are posing that question. Greta Thunberg will certainly say COP26 was a fiasco, but I do not agree with her, because UK had a strong intention to present the high level of ambition towards 1.5 degree future and also 2050 carbon neutrality. And though there was certain tone down in that language, but largely UK has succeeded in introducing such kind of ambitious wording, including the phasing down of the unabated coal power in the power generation. So I very much, how can I say, praise the diplomatic skill by the UK government. So, but on the other hand, the agreed document, Glasgow Climate Pact, include clearly that in order to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius target, we need to reduce the global emissions by 45% by 2030 towards carbon neutrality by 2050. Concerning the carbon neutrality by 2050, of course, it depends on the progress of various innovative technologies, but I cannot be optimistic about 45% target by 2030, given that China will peak out by 2030 their emissions, and also India will continue to grow their emissions beyond 2030. And also, yes, there are many countries who have announced their carbon neutrality goals, including 2060 for Indonesia and 2050 for Vietnam. But many of those carbon neutrality targets are somehow conditional to the support from developed countries. And Prime Minister Modi from India clearly said that developing country will need $1 trillion per year for achieving global carbon neutrality. And whether or not a developed country are ready to provide such a huge amount of financial assistance to developing countries, that remains to be seen. So we have seen so many, how can I say, ambitious wording, but actual implementation is a key. And the Glasgow Climate Pact calls a next decade as a critical decade. And they have agreed to set up a work plan for raising level of ambition towards 2030. But we also need to recognize that we are in the middle of energy crisis throughout the world, not only in Europe, but also in the Asia Pacific region. And natural gas price is increasing and even coal price is increasing. And what is happening in many countries, including Japan? Yesterday, Japanese government initiated the subsidy for gasoline price to cool down the gasoline price. And I think the similar initiative must have been taken in many ASEAN countries as well to cope with the energy price hike. So that shows that the people are very much, how can I say, concerned about climate change. But if that comes to their day-to-day energy expense, then their willingness to pay could be much lower than ideal level. So that is a very difficult part of the climate change problems. All of them agree about the importance of climate change mitigation, but they are not necessarily ready to pay additional cost for tackling climate change. So, as introduced by you, I have a lot of communication with energy policy makers of ASEAN countries, and keyword I have here from them is affordability. And affordability is a key for many ASEAN countries. So they're working, the decarbonization for a low future, but unless that decarbonization or low carbon future can ensure affordability for the general public, politically, that could be very much difficult to swallow. So how to say strike a balance between climate mitigation and, for example, the SDG 7, affordable energy supply. So that is a challenge. And also concerning the energy mix, I'd like to emphasize that what we are aiming at is the low carbon future and decarbonization, not necessarily the completely phasing out of fossil fuels, because we have CCUS and we have ammonia technologies and so on. And Prime Minister Kishida clearly said that, given that ASEAN countries or Asian countries we still depend on fossil fuel power and fossil fuel energy. So that is why Japan is going to extend a support for, say, ammonia technologies or hydrogen technologies in order to reduce the carbon footprint of the, say, fossil fuel use in those countries. So ideological rejection of fossil fuel from Asian energy mix may not be realistic. So we need to be pragmatic and realistic in order to, say, sustain our long-term efforts towards a low-carbon future and eventually carbon neutrality. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you. And speaking about affordability and making it realistic to the parties, I would like to invite Dr. Sharon Seah, because your research interest is on multilateralism. So do you think after Glasgow COP, is it still alive? And what about the geopolitics behind it? We know that the US is back, but everyone is wondering whether President Joe Biden can move past any policies past Congress, for instance. So many are still, a bit doubtful about US being back to the climate negotiation table. And there's also a lot of pointing fingers to China, Brazil, and Russia who are not updating their climate ambition. So do you think multilateralism is still alive and well post the Glasgow COP? And what do you think about the next Glasgow that is going to, the next COP that is going to be hosted by Egypt?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and also very stimulating interventions by the previous two speakers. I think firstly, we cannot deny that climate change is right at the very top of President Biden's list of priorities. I think that was the first thing he did when he came into office, where he put the US back into the Paris Agreement. And then he convened very quickly in short order the Leaders Summit, and he has made certain pronouncements. And going forward also, he has a Build Back Better partnership in play. Of course, we're hoping to hear more from the US as to the details of this partnership. He has also promulgated the Global Methane Pledge, where he's getting China to come in to work together to reduce methane leakage and to control the emissions. So I think all of this is very promising. It remains to be seen, of course, whether there's going to be a follow-through at the working level as to whether these sorts of pledges will really take place. So I think coming out of COP26, there's a lot of optimism because there were so many political pledges and the media tended to put a lot of attention on that. But let's remember, these are only political pledges. What we want to see is whether these political pledges make their way into the NDCs and into the long-term low-emission development strategies of these countries. That means that academics like me will be spending all of my time in the next few years examining whether countries are really serious about putting the pledges into play. I won't say that multilateralism has died. It's actually taken a hiatus because of COVID-19. I think the UNFCCC Secretariat made a very good effort to keep the momentum alive. They put a lot of meetings on Zoom. And in fact, if you were just a member of the public, you could find so many of the proceedings being made available online, where in the past you have to be there physically on the ground to attend the meetings and listen in to the side events. So it's quite understandable because COVID has forced everyone to look inwards and to settle their public health threat. They had to close borders and ensure that the public remains safe. But I think with hopefully the severity of Omicron is not there. Hopefully we will move back to some kind of a new normal where we can start to really work on multilateral cooperation. So at COP, we found that there were some outcomes that were not so satisfactory and some that were quite okay. So by that nature of multilateralism, it means that we have to give some and we also have to take some. But in that process, we need to move everyone closer to the goal. And I think some of these goals coming out of the Glasgow Climate Pact has sort of changed and tightened, where in the past we talked about 2 degrees, the Glasgow Climate Pact now talks about 1.5. And I think countries need to be very aware that when they are making the NDC pledges and putting policies in place, you must be very realistic as to what you will achieve in all of your policies. So there's that differentiation, and also, of course, your phase out versus phase down. And I think one very small word missed out there is unabated. So I agree with Professor Jun Arima that, ideological rejection of fossil fuel is not going to be helpful. No matter what, in this region, in Asia Pacific, we still have not reached the development levels that we desire, and we cannot deny the countries that level of development they want to achieve, which means that fossil fuel will still play a part, but hopefully we will reduce the role of fossil fuel over time. So where it is now maybe over 90%, we bring it down as we continue investing in energy infrastructure, and we kick in our ASEAN power grid, hopefully. And then there are also other parts of COP26 where we have the Article 6 that allows countries to cooperate with each other using mechanisms such as a carbon market. I think if we can do that well and not greenwash our credits, we do stand a chance of making an impact. So somebody has previously criticized what we have been doing in negotiations as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? So I think we've already rearranged it. It's time to start bailing out the water and save the ship. And that's where countries have to come in and really plan for an orderly and systematic energy transition. Now, here I am talking about mitigation, of course, and not forgetting that adaptation also plays a very huge part. And here is where our developed country partners have to come in to help our ASEAN counterparts to do this. Why? Because in all of our NDCs, 7 out of 10 countries have put conditional targets, and that means they need to receive international assistance. Only Brunei, Malaysia, and Singapore do not have these conditions imposed, and they are willing to meet their targets based on their own ability and capacities. So 7 out of 10, that's not very good news, but hopefully with assistance, they can achieve those targets. And at this point, I really do not see how we can achieve that 45% reduction by 2030 goal with present policies, which means countries, governments need to go back and be very radical in rethinking their policies. And one last point, I do a survey every year on climate perceptions of Southeast Asians, and it's quite clear to us that Southeast Asians do want to see more. About 45% of them say that governments are aware of climate change threat, but have not allocated enough resources. Of this, I think 52% of Indonesians share that view. So they definitely want to see more being done. But coming back to Professor Arima's point, when we ask them who should bear the burden, the individual does not want to bear the burden. The individual says governments first, and then big corporations must pay the price before it comes down to me, the individual. So this mindset may change over time, as we continue to improve and embark on this journey for decarbonization, where people accept their responsibility as well. I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me go to Ibu Kuki. It's interesting that previous speaker said that whatever we agreed at the COP26, it has to be seen within the framework of affordability, within the framework of the heart of the Paris Agreement, which is common but differentiated responsibility. And do you see that there's been tension between the developed and developing countries at the COP? Have developed countries been doing enough? Have they been transparent enough? And have the resources been trickling down to the countries and to the sectors that need them the most?
Okay, thank you, Madayu, for having me here. Yeah, I think it's a negotiation process, right? So definitely there is always like tension between the two big groups, if I can say, developed and developing countries. But from what I see also that there are more collaboration now come into implementation as well, right? For example, what we've heard about this support for South Africa, for example, to basically to shift their energy system from fossil based to more cleaner and renewable one. And this is a type, and I think it's also aligned with what Dr. Naoko Ishii mentioned earlier. This is a type of maybe not kind of multilateralism, but it's a support from a group of countries, a group of development agencies to a certain country that will basically give a great impact to the global climate, for example, if you are talking about this. And this is also what, if we are looking at Indonesia, and I think Pak Dino mentioned also earlier, from what we already plan now, we need that huge amount of financial resources. And of course, if we have to, I think it's a normal things, right? If we have to choose whether you want to use the money to, let's say, support your the health of your people versus, if I can say, climate change, which still in a way difficult to be understood by all the population, then as a government, I think it's normal. Then you're gonna choose the one that more popular, which is to support most of the community in health issue, right? So I think this is one thing that becoming a very important consideration for developing countries. And also as developing countries around the world, they are in fact have been affected the most, right? So the impact of climate change are basically how do you call it, experience more in developing countries or least developed countries. There are, of course, affected other countries as well, developed countries also being affected, but it's different level and different capacity and capability to respond to it. So I think this is where and why developing countries are basically very strong in these financial issues, financial support issues. And this is, if I can say, one of the issues that becoming a big tension between developing and developed countries is this one, right? Because in the Paris Agreement, or before that, even in Copenhagen, in Cancun, we agreed that there will be $100 billion annually for up to 2020 to support developing countries, right? For climate actions. And the last, sorry, the biennial assessment of the Standing Committee for Finance that launched at COP26 shows that it's still far away from that amount. So it's about 50% of that. So, this become a big issue. And also the new quantitative goals for finance is also another story. So I think finance definitely will be a big issue. And also the balance of the support, financial support between mitigation and adaptation is also, I think, still a big questions, because we agreed to have, like balance, like 50-50 for mitigation and adaptation. And now it's kind of maybe 75%, 25%, so mitigation 75% and adaptation 25% kind of thing. I mean, like, understand that the mitigation will need a lot of financial support, because it will, have a lot of technology involved, a lot of, that kind of research and development, of course. But for adaptation and for countries that sorry, countries that has very how do you call it, country like developing countries, basically they have a lot of impact, and they need to spend a quite big percentage of their GDP to respond to the impact of climate change. So that's one area that I think becoming a big tension between the two groups of countries. developing countries definitely need support for, addressing the impact, but at the same time also they need support also and access to technologies, access to know-how, especially because I mean, like we were talking earlier about the shifting from let's say fossil based to a cleaner energy, but for countries that has limited resources, limited level of knowledge, then it's another story. It's another it will cost more, because then you need to have either international experts, which will cost more, or you also otherwise you need to educate the people back home. That will be another year of investment to educate and so on. So I think that is basically where the tension is, and it's still there, even though there are already more collaboration among those countries between developed and developing countries. And I think it will be interesting to see what will happen this year in Egypt, for example, because definitely it will be African COP. And as African COP, definitely impact of climate change, lack of financial resources, lack of capacity, lack of technology will be a very big issues. And I think we have to address it very, wisely, and we need to get ready to it. I'll stop there. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you. So Ibu Kuki mentioned about resources and the importance of helping developing and also the least developed countries. So it would be a good cue for me to go to Dr. Naoko Ishii, since you've been the CEO of the Global Environmental Facility and you're familiar with these funds, be it Adaptation Fund and GF and GCF. There's a lot of expectations for these funds to perform their roles in providing financing. So what do you think, what needs to be done for them to be able to meet these expectations?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, even if I was the CEO of the GF and it's about $1 billion per year, it really doesn't solve the problem. And somebody said, actually, that yes, 100 billion become a kind of symbol of that trust between North and South, or the trust of the negotiation. But I actually even don't think that the 100 billion can solve the issue that we are facing. What we really need is that how we can transform the current economic system so that we can address this global commons issue, or this tragedy of commons issue, and then also the how to bring that the North and South much more together, so that to me, where I do understand that very well about the 100 billion as a symbolic issue, and it's really the symbol of lack of trust, so it needs to be solved. But I really want to see much more like what are the new economic system under which that the developed and developing, that with the different countries which have a different condition can really work together towards this global the common agenda. And rather than thinking about the money to be transferred from one side to another, what are the new economic, the trade and the investment program through which the resources can go to the right place with right technology or the right knowledge. And to me, that is should be much more sustainable. And it's not really that North gives something to South, that both sides have to benefit out of it. Otherwise, it's not sustainable longer term. So I was actually thinking more like the few examples that you and I, the previous speaker mentioned, have that kind of the characteristic. I think that maybe Ibu Kuti that mentioned this South Africa example. That is that you, right? And the South Africa example is really a good one because it's also multilateral collaboration of that the MDBs or bilateral, but then the private sector, that the philanthropy and else to really to find a way to how to bring the South African economic model to be much more sustainable and also in harmony with that nature and that challenge. And we are doing it not because that as a gift or ODA, it's more like we also want to benefit out of it, and in the longer term, not necessarily short term. So how we can create that kind of multi-stakeholder coalition, the mechanism, we mentioned that both I and Professor Arima mentioned this early energy transition mechanism for Asia. That is also another example that how those MDBs, bilateral government philanthropy, the business together to assist this early transition, early retirement of coal, but also early acceleration of the renewable energy. And we believe that we can both, and everybody can benefit out of it. So these are kind of examples that how we can use the trade and the investment with a lot of, a little bit of the innovation, innovative thinking, and to shift this and some of the actual economic system we see as a problem, so that then and that's the reason I was excited about the COP26 is that I have started to see some of those good examples of that new multilateral collaboration or multi-stakeholder coalition. And then we all question about the enforceability or accountability, and those new mechanisms also are trying to see that how it can be implemented and then how the accountability be met. So I see quite a good the progress forward, and I'm expecting the COP27 will give us more of those example. Just going back to your original question that yes, those are the multi-funds and the targeted or actually the tailored to the climate issue can do still the great thing that because these are grant money in many cases, and so that they can provide that policy advice, and they can take the risk of the private sector or other long-term investment cannot take, and they can actually bond the different stakeholders together as a part of this multi-stakeholder coalition. So those funds are extremely important, but it doesn't really on their own can change this big economic system, and we need much more thinking that how to put price on carbon, or how to put the price on or the value the nature, so that our current problem, which Professor Arima mentioned very clearly, that we were all in that suffering from the tragedy of commons. So how we can break this tragedy of commons and to have the shared global common goal. So that's what we want to do together. Back to you.
Thank you. Let me go to Professor Jun Arima. Preventing the tragedy of commons. Dr. Naoko Ishii says that we need everyone to be on board. What about the private sector? How do we, or how should they be incentivized to take part? You mentioned that there's a energy crisis looming. There's a need to for us collectively to make that affordable transition. How do we make this transition affordable? And what do you think of the recently announced plan by the EU to raise carbon tax or to impose carbon tax? Do you think that will be acceptable, or that would be acceptable, I should say, by the developing countries?
Yeah, and you must be talking about so-called carbon border adjustment measures proposed by European Commission. And that is very much, how can I say, politically controversial issue, in particular vis-a-vis trading partners from developing countries. Currently, the scope of CBAM is limited to steel, cement, and also fertilizer and aluminium and electricity. And major exporters of this item are Ukraine or Russia or Turkey or India, not necessarily ASEAN countries, but eventually that CBAM could be expanding its scope to other goods. And that will certainly trigger the debate of so-called disguised protectionism in the name of climate change mitigation or the environment protection. And that would be a very much confrontational issue between developed and developing countries. And in order to be WTO compatible, European Commission are required to get into the dialogue with trading partners. So eventually, Asian countries will be also, say, contacted by European friends, whether or not they can swallow the border carbon adjustment measures. And I'm not so, how can I say, convinced about the wide application of CBAM because of its technical complexity for calculating carbon contents, in particular for complicated goods, going through global supply chain, and also possible implication to, say, a trade war between the major emerging economies and the developed countries. So I think a lot of them, how can I say, carbon tariff idea, perhaps that could be more, how can I say, constructive to discuss some sort of minimum performance standard for certain energy consuming products, or the steel products or cement products or something, looking at carbon intensity per ton or something, rather than imposing a tariff. But let's agree on minimum performance standard among major trading partners in major sectors. So it is called a sectoral approach. But that kind of approach could be more, how can I say, politically constructive compared with imposing tariff unilaterally by EU to developing country partners. And then coming back to your original question, what is the incentive for the private sectors to be engaged in low carbon future? I think one good news is there is a growing trend in such area as TCFD, the task force of carbon-related financial disclosure, or CDP, or others. Many global companies are under pressure to say present their say carbon data, right? So I think private companies has its own incentive to decrease its carbon emissions, either direct emissions or indirect emissions. And and in the COP26, we have agreed upon the Article 6, the market mechanism. So perhaps that could incentivize the private enterprises in developed countries to do some sort of low carbon projects in developing countries, so that they can say make an access to cheaper carbon credits. So you may call it as a greenwashing. Greta Thunberg might call it as a greenwashing, but I do not necessarily agree with her, because that will say accelerate the trade and investment in the green field. So I think the one big achievement of COP26 is agreement of Article number 6, and I hope that will trigger more active trade and investment for the environmental friendly activities. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you. Let me go to Dr. Sharon Seah. Professor Jun Arima mentioned that there's many instruments that are currently being developed, and probably you may have heard that Indonesia may think about having a carbon crypto product being released into the market. So looking at ASEAN member states, you also mentioned that there's disparity or differences among them. Some are able to meet their climate ambition, perhaps, by their own resources and capabilities. So do you think that ASEAN member states are ready to take on the market and different instruments are coming to them? Or do you think they are in a stage where they still need the transfer of technology and this very high support from the international community?
Yeah, I think that all of our ASEAN member states have indicated in their 2021 NDCs that they intend to use some form of carbon market mechanisms. So a lot of awareness raising and capacity building needs to be done in that respect. And besides that, you also do need to create an enabling regulatory environment for such projects to take off. So while I can see that, in the sense that if you can get private sector to come in and invest in certain carbon projects or carbon offset projects, create those credits that have integrity, can stand up to scrutiny, it will be a win-win situation. But in order for private sector to do that, governments need to provide an enabling and transparent and accountable framework so that the private sector has confidence to be able to enter that market. So just speaking where I am, for Singapore, I think there's already a lot of great interest. So Singapore has started a voluntary carbon market. It's called a Climate Impact Tax. It was started in the middle of last year, and it's still very new, but I believe that the interest and the take-up in a voluntary carbon trading system will take place eventually. But in ASEAN member states, right, what you need to do is, first of all, they have to have a standard MRV system in place to measure their GHG inventories. So firstly, you need to know your own baseline, and then you need to know how much of your carbon sinks are in place. So it's an actual accounting system that needs to be in place firstly. And that's the part that needs capacity building from various parties who are experienced in doing this. Some of the smaller countries in our region do not have that experience. I think Indonesia has had some experience in cooperating, for instance, with Japan for certain carbon projects. And you also have experience in REDD plus and so on. So that baseline of experience is already there. But for other countries, it's not the case. So we need capacity building in that area. And then in the other areas will be basically countries have to then think about setting your carbon tax and also putting in place your emissions trading schemes. And that is a kind of a long process and politically treacherous for some countries to impose a carbon tax whereby your first, like in Singapore's case, they targeted the large emitters, and as I understand it, the Singapore's carbon tax from $5 will be reviewed, and when the government says review, it usually means it will be revised. So it's sort of a hint to the emitters that watch out, there is going to be an increase. And I believe that over time this carbon tax will filter down to other aspects of our economy. And for other countries that are thinking of doing that, I believe they've already been working on this and will be instituting their own carbon tax. So it'll be exciting and interesting over the next decade to see how all of the different countries' plans will fall into place and whether we can actually merge and come together in a kind of a trading system that works for everyone and meeting your NDC targets. Yeah, it's challenging, but it can be done, I believe, if we have enough of the resources coming from our partners. Yeah. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you so much. And to Ibu Kuki, since Indonesia is the president for G20 this year, what do you think are the key takeaways from the Glasgow COP that Indonesia would like to raise in the conference this year?
I think we've heard about it, right? I mean, like the president already mentioned that the three major issues that would be brought by Indonesia. Definitely, I mean, like one on global health, and then the second one is on digital transformation, and the third one is on energy transition. So I think the energy transition is in a way also, will to some extent learn from what we got already in COP26, and also to have that kind of cooperation like Dr. Naoko Ishii mentioned earlier about this multilateral support for different countries, especially if you are talking about G20, then there are developing countries and developed countries within the G20. So it's kind of small, the miniature of the UNFCCC, if I can say. So the discussion on that. So it might not, I mean, like if we see the government or the Indonesian agenda for G20, there is no specific item mentioned about climate, like and in a big as one of the big agenda. But I think it will be under the energy transition because it has a lot to do with climate anyway. And I think another topic definitely about the finance part of it, right? Because there is also an agenda on the macroeconomics impact of climate change. And this will definitely not only for Indonesia, but for everyone, right? And especially because Indonesia is, I think, the developing countries presidency of G20, then it is Indonesia's, if I can say, responsibility also to bring the developing countries' views and perspective and needs to the agenda. So, you know, energy transition is, I found it's already like a very, very, how do you call it, attractive topic, yet it's very complicated because it has everything. It has finance, it has technology, it has capacity, it has also all this cooperation and collaboration. I think that's my I think my impression from what happened from COP26 and what we see in Indonesia's presidency of G20 agenda. So I hope that answer, Mbak Dayu.
Yes, thank you so much, Ibu Kuki. Let us go to the question and answer from our audience. Let me go first to actually Professor Jun Arima, because there's a lot of questions on the Japanese government to willingness to help Indonesia in making its way to transition away from coal. We have a question from IFAN, for example, Indonesia Renewable Energy Society, and also from Bina Sujana from Indonesia from CMKP law firm. So is the Japanese government willing to provide support to developing countries such as Indonesia in terms of transfer of technology and also financing for its whole transition, or I should say finding alternative energy to reduce reliance on coal and fossil fuel?
Yeah, thank you very much. And as I described, Prime Minister Kishida clearly mentioned that he's willing to support Asian countries for Asian Energy Transition Initiative, acknowledging that Asian countries are still very much relying on fossil fuels. So there are many technologies for reducing carbon footprint from the current energy mix, including switching from coal to natural gas, and also co-firing between coal and ammonia or biomass and so on, and also co-firing between natural gas and hydrogen, and of course switch from coal to renewables. And I do not think renewable is the only answer for low carbon future and decarbonization in Asian countries. That will certainly reflect the national specific circumstances. But the intention of Japanese government is we are going to help Asian countries individually, depending on their specific national circumstances after having a dialogue. And so that kind of tailor-made support is quite important, rather than applying stretch jacket to everybody, because the diversity. Diversity is one of the keywords in ASEAN countries, and Japan is a long-term friend of ASEAN countries, and we know how ASEAN politics will evolve. So therefore, Japanese government is very much willing to support Indonesia and other ASEAN countries, paying particular attention to their priority and also specific national circumstances.
Thank you. And let me go to Dr. Naoko Ishii. There's a question from Fahri Anas, IIGF Indonesia. The climate change negotiation is sometimes highly influenced by state leaders, and we have seen how the US actually pulled away from climate negotiation when President Trump was in power. So how much do you think that events like this may derail the countries from its negotiation and its common agenda to mitigate and prevent climate change?
Yeah, thank you for a great question, actually. And we are all relieved that the US is back to the club. But I would say that we also realize, as we discussed for the last 1 hour or so, it's not just the state that these days, it's really the combination of the state power, but also supported by non-state actors. And I see a really strong push to get those state negotiations forward by those non-state actors coalition. And actually they have produced quite a good outcome out of it, so that I would say that yeah, that we can still focus on that Fitch and the global leaders are behaving in fat way, but we shouldn't really underestimate that our role, your role, each one of us, to be a part of this non-state actors coalition and how to really influence even the state the negotiation. And I actually see a lot of that actually the hope and the opportunity for us to do it the right thing, even outside the negotiation at the Glasgow, that we see a lot of interesting the coalition actually joined by the states too, like the deforestation, how to stop the deforestation, and then how to do the methane, which we already discussed. So that so there are quite a number of things that we can really do together. So I would say again that that we should really go together hand in hand to create this strong pathway that rather than thinking about the economy. And so that would be my kind of tip going forward.
Yeah, let's hope that the US is staying in. Thank you. Let me also go to Dr. Sharon Sia. There's a question from Yobel Novian Putra, Indonesia. You mentioned that in order for the market-based mechanism to work, there needs to be a standardized MRV, or monitoring, reporting, and verification system or criteria or even framework. But now there are numerous out there, and how should we collectively move forward towards harmonizing, agreeing on a common standard that is acceptable to all, just to get the market going, but yet we can still safeguard its integrity, so to speak. So what do you think needs to take place?
In the Paris Agreement, there are already some common reporting standards and also common timeframes and so on. So actually, what I meant was that within each country, they have to decide how they are going to measure their emissions from, either sectorally down to the industries. And they also have to think, for very big countries, right? They have to measure at the national level, provincial level, county level. So it really goes down to the very, very nitty-gritty. So it's actually up to each country, as long as they report according to the standards to the UNFCCC Secretariat. I'm not an MRV expert, but I just think that, we need to, at the very basic level, decide on common units on how you want to trade and so on. I think there are already mechanisms. There are more mature markets out there that are already trading, and we can already learn from them and from their example. I want to take this chance to also, really chime in on Ibu Naoko's point about non-state actors, because it's very encouraging, actually, if you watch the evolution of the climate regime. It is, in fact, the only regime in international law that has increasingly given importance to non-state actors. Because when you look at geopolitical affairs, right, it's always conducted state to state. But ever since the UNFCCC was signed, and then we grew, the regime continued growing, you can see that the voices of the non-state actors have been increasingly being considered, and they are being given importance. And of course, not to mention that the generation of our Greta Thunbergs have certainly made themselves very visible and heard on the world stage. So I'm very encouraged. I do believe that this problem cannot be sorted out just by governments alone, and it needs a very close coordination between government, private sector, civil society, academia, media. All aspects of society needs to be in on it. And I definitely applaud Ibu Naoko's point that, even down to every individual, having to think about what is the part that you can play in the climate crisis.
Thank you. Let me go to Ibu Kuki. I have I have a message from Yobel Novian Putra. I will read your exact question later on in the next round. So let me go to Ibu Kuki. We have a number of questions from the audience saying that any energy transition is, of course, quite costly. It can also be quite political. So what do you think of Indonesia? Do you think that the political process is a challenge for us to do that transition? And do you think that there's also a disadvantage for coal exporting countries such as Indonesia and Australia in the whole coal phase down discussion at the Glasgow COP?
Yeah, I think that's in a way true, right? Anything is basically really depend on the politics of any country. But I think for each country, then the politics will have their own, how do you call it? Maybe if I can say key issues or key target. So, of course, one of it would be the popularity, but another one might be on the economy of the country. And I think it's already shown now, even for a country like Indonesia, even though we are like coal exporter, we got issues of coal for PLN was it last week or 2 weeks ago, right? And it's really like a big issues even for a country that own the resources. We still have issues. So I think it also shows that there is a need to rethinking our and also replanning our energy system. So the political part of the government of the country need to see it also, that it's not only, like if I can say, get the easiest income with the less costs without thinking about the externalities, because now it's already shows that there are already additional costs. In fact, I mean, like, it might not be the cost of, let's say, electricity generation, but then we already have cost of agriculture, failure of harvesting, issues on fisheries because of the how do you call it, extreme weather and all those things. So I think they need to rethinking everything. We cannot just make things like as simple as because we have it, so just use it as much as we can. I mean, that would be nice if you can, but you cannot do that because you have to be responsible of others as well, and at least you have to be responsible of your own constituencies, right? So yeah, I mean, like, of course politics will be everywhere, but I think as Ibu Naoko mentioned earlier, this is time for us, like the coalition of non-state actors, to send the right message to the government, to send the right message to not only to the government but also to other non-state actors, because there are also different part of group of non-state actors, right? So that we can, in a way, be wiser, if I can say that. Thank you, Madayu.
Thank you. Of course, everything is political. This is not isolated, related to climate change alone. But the other thing that is political is the taxonomy, or whether one sector or one technology can be considered green and not green in another country. So the question from Yobel Novian Putra is, he has given an example that EU has excluded waste to energy incinerator from their sustainable finance taxonomy because it's carbon intensive and it's basically hinders waste reduction target. However, it is still considered green in Japan, for example, as it is committed to export WTE incinerator from Osaka Blue Ocean Vision, and it's also part of ABB's new energy policy. So would anyone would like to comment on that, that taxonomy can be different from one country to the other? And perhaps, okay, Professor Jun Arima, you raise your hand, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And of course, European taxonomy is being developed based on European context. But Asian countries have a different energy landscape and also very much different economic development stage. So I think European standards should not be applied to all over the world. And Asia is the epicenter of the additional energy demand and additional CO2 emissions. So therefore, Asian countries need to develop their own, how can I say, transition finance, and also eventually going towards decarbonization future. So their category could be certainly be differentiated from European one. And EU has an advantage. Once they have developed their own standard, then in Vienna Convention, in the international standardization organizations, they can go immediately to the final stage to make European standard to a global standard. But Asian countries needs to, how can I say, have a say in such a debate so that ISL will also incorporate the reality of ASEAN and Asian countries.
Thank you. I also have another related question with regards to the different standards, but Sharon, would you like to?
Yes, I just wanted to address the question, which is there actually isn't any international taxonomy standards at the moment. EU has one, China has, ASEAN has their own. So at some point, there has to be some kind of a convergence where you talk about the interoperability of the different taxonomies so that investors and regulators and so on have the common language to talk about what constitutes sustainable activities and what does not constitute sustainable. So that's probably a kind of work in progress, I suspect, because there are even some countries who do not want to have a taxonomy. They don't see the importance in having one. So I think there are varying stages, and we all have to be, it has to be suited to the country's specific circumstances. So the ASEAN taxonomy, for instance, is very interesting. It works on a traffic light system, and it allows countries to enter at the lowest level before they are expected to, increasingly up their own standards in the taxonomy. I think that is a great way to ensure that everyone gets to play in that game without saying, oh no, you're too low standard, you cannot come into the game. Everyone gets in, and then we try to improve everybody's performance as we go along. But that is very different from the EU taxonomy. They have a different set of standards. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Naoko Ishii?
Yeah, that's a very challenging and maybe politically charged question. I have to say, I do have a slightly different opinion from Professor Arima. I actually don't think that we should have too many different standards, or that the Asian standard shouldn't be that different than whichever standard either EU or other countries. And at the end of the day, we have a common goal of let's achieve that the carbon neutrality by 2050 or mid-century, that depending on the which country you are, that then there may be that the goal may be 2060 or even 2070. But as a globe, we have to find a way to get as close as possible to carbon neutrality. Otherwise, we would be all dead. So that, I think this common goal to set the common goal and we work together towards that goal is extremely important. So whichever standard you may want to come up with, ideally speaking, they are all science-based. And then we need to, and ideally speaking, that not to confuse the investors and the consumers and the citizens. At some point, we have to see the convergence of those and the standard. And then there is a question about CBAM. And of course, I really don't have a nitty-gritty of that understanding, but in general, I want to emphasize in general, the one way to change the system as Ibu Cookie mentioned, that everything needs to be replanned and that the system needs to be replanned. That then one thing we need to find a way is how to price that the carbon, that how to price the natural capital, how to price those externalities. And this price shouldn't be that different from one region to another, because one common goal is to achieve the carbon neutrality by mid-century. And to me, the CBAM is one way to do this and pricing the carbon, and then it may be one way for other countries to really join that kind of thinking, so that I'm less hostile on that idea. I want to see just one pricing on the carbon along the world, and to me that is one way to catalyze the system change. And I really hope that Asia, ASEAN, the G20, and you are hosting the G20, can really drive this and a very politically charged the question in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naoko Aishi. I think you touched upon a question by Arina Frill from Sriwijaya University, Indonesia. Anyway, before I go to Ibu Kuki, I'd like to also say something about that we sometimes, people who are working in the environmental climate change sector are accused of having our own language, having our own speak, and it's too complicated for the public to grasp the true meaning. So I think Dr. Naoko Ishii's intervention is important as long as we understand that there are risks associated with us, abandoning or forsaking the importance of natural resources, sustainable natural resources management, and costing that or pricing that accordingly, whatever term or jargon you may want to use, or no matter what kind of mechanism that you want to use, as long as you have that. Now, Ibu Kuki, please.
Yeah, I just want to add a bit on what already mentioned by the three speakers before me. I think one of the key messages is that we need to have things through multilateralism process. So it is difficult if everyone start to have like policy decision on unilateralism, because then it will, in a way, it will affect the others as well. But I think to be able to have it like as a multilateralism through a multilateralism process, then what we need also is to increase the capacity of all different, let's say if we are talking about this, then maybe all different countries, so that they have the same understanding, they have the same term, and all these things, so that everyone basically can understand. If let's say one country come with the idea of CBAM, then everyone understand what is it, and they can in a way give response as well. And I think one of the issues, if I can say, Mbak Dayu, to refer to your first questions, I think on the difference or the tension between developing and developed countries, there is also that kind of unilateralism that sometimes imposed by developed countries to the whole UNFCCC process. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have very rich contribution from our panelists. We talk about COP26 being a multilateral platform that has some merit despite its flaws. We talk about common but differentiated responsibilities, the difference or disparity between developed and developing nations and how to bridge them. We talk about the need to have convergence. And with that, I would like to invite our panelists to have a 1-minute closing remark. I would like to begin with Dr. Naoko Ishii, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really exciting discussion. But let's make sure that we all share the common goal, that for our own sake, let's achieve that kind of carbon neutrality by mid-century. And it's very important for us to keep it as a common goal, because it's so easy for us to falling down to the individual, that vested interest. And once we lose that hand-in-hand kind of structure, that we go back to this another isolated the situation. So let's like us, that who may be much freer from state negotiator, we have our own responsibility to hold hand together and aim high for our own sake. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Let me now invite Professor Jun Arima.
Thank you very much. And generally speaking, we tend to be very much obsessed with emission reduction target numbers. But what makes that number achievement possible is the performance of various technologies and also cost. So I think a lot of them, they are too much obsessed with emission reduction target. I think we should also consider technology goals in terms of performance or cost reduction, and also pave the way for international collaboration project in certain ASEAN countries, for example, large-scale CCUS demonstration project or something. That could be much more constructive. And again, I'm very much happy to be able to participate in this very much rich discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharon.
Thank you so much. So basically, ASEAN just contributes only 5.6% of the total GHG emissions in the world, according to data in 2018. So we are just like a small drop in the bucket. But I believe that all ASEAN countries are very intent on fulfilling their responsibility, under the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC. But a lot of it hinges on cooperating well with each other as well as outside of ASEAN. And the fact remains that we cannot cooperate well if we are not having these sorts of dialogue. So I'm really pleased that you have organized this. It's very important. We are right at the start of what we want to do, which is to transition in a way that is good and orderly and just to the communities that are being affected. So I think the conversation has to continue beyond today, and I hope that it is not the be all and end all. And thank you very much again, FPCI and GRIPS, for putting the panel together. I enjoyed myself a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Puki.
Yeah, I think the same as the others. I'm also happy to be part of this conversation, and I think it's very enlightened for me as well. And for me, if we are talking about climate change, I would say like leave the negotiation to the government, because under the UNFCCC, it's also they are the party, so leave it there. And we know that it will be long and complex and slow process, but we as the community outside the government, as a non-state actors, we have more, if I can say, power to do something, to make things happen. And it doesn't have to wait until anything achieved in the negotiation. We know what we need, we know what we want. So let's work together hand in hand through this kind of conversation, but also through other collaborations, so that we can achieve what we need for, not for us only, but also for the next generation. Thank you for having me, Badayu.
Thank you. So before I close, let's look at what happens post COP26. I believe that all the panelists say that there is, for the planet to survive the imminent energy and climate crisis, we need to make sure that we work together and making sure that the commitment is or can be broken down into doable, realistic, actionable technology. We also talk about programs that is involving different and multiple stakeholders. We talk about financing, we talk about standards, and we even talk about taxonomy and what it means to make sure that we are financing and we are supporting sustainable projects, of course, in our own capacities based on our own resources. We also talk about the importance of regionalism for ASEAN to step up, and for Indonesia, especially as it is taking on the G20 presidency. And again, we need to make things happen and not just to focus on what kind of commitments or agreements that is made, but to make sure that they are actually making significant and important changes in our day-to-day lives, and in ensuring that, of course, our planet survives not only at present, but for the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists. I enjoyed the discussion. Let's give a virtual round of applause Thank you so much, Dr. Naoko Ishii, Professor Jun Arima, Dr. Sharon Seah, and also Ibu Kuki Sujahmun. And thank you for GRIPS and FPCI for inviting us to this wonderful discussion. Thank you for the audience for a very interesting questions. We hope we have read them all. And if not, I believe this is not the final and the last conversation. And with that, thank you so much. I would like to apologize if there are any lapses from my side, and let me return the floor to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dayu, for moderating. We would also like to once again thank you to Dr. Naoko Ishii, Professor Jun Arima, Ms. Sharon, and Ibu Kuki for the insightful session. There have been a lot of interesting questions coming from the audience, as we can see in the Zoom chat box, and we have over 200 participants tuning into our discussion from both Zoom and also our YouTube channel. It has been a fruitful discussion, and I'm sure the audience found the session to be informative. For everyone's information, today's event is available for rewatch on FPCI official YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. Ladies and gentlemen, so that was all for our public discussion today. You can follow our social media handles for more information about our activities, events, and programs, and also stay tuned to our next FPCI Group's virtual public forum via Instagram or via Twitter at FPC Indo. Thank you everyone for tuning in. You may now leave the Zoom meeting. See you.